So, Hillary, would you please call the roll?
Tim Andrus,
Here.
Don Byram,
Here.
Kurt Campbell,
Here.
Pat Calhoun, Ray Chavez,
Here.
Alan Cockrell,
Here.
Will Conley, Charlie Flatten,
Here.
Vic Hildebrand, Kevin Yannick,
Here.
Tom Youngman, Russell Davis,
Here.
Glenn Lord,
Here.
Dan Meyer,
Here.
Gary Middleton,
Here.
Kevin Pattison,
Tommy Hill for Kevin Patterson.
Ileana Pena, Robert Puente,
Here.
Humberto Ramos,
Here.
Steve Ramsey,
Here.
Weldon Riggs,
Blaine Short filling in.
Roland Ruiz,
Here.
Diane Savage, Suzanne Scott,
Here.
Greg Singelman, Mitchell Sauer,
Here.
Heather Sumter, Thomas Taggart,
Here.
Ian Taylor, Diane Wasnich,
Here.
Adam Yablonsky,
Here.
Elizabeth McCoy, here, Ronald Feisler, Ileana Delgado, Don McGee, Marty Kelly, Joseph McDaniel, Jamie McCool, here, Carl Poole, and Rusty Ray. Report.
All right, thank you. All right, next, I don't have any forms for public comment. Were there any, Stephen? Okay. Currently don't have any public comment at this time. Next is approval of the minutes from the November 7th meeting of the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group. Any comments on the minutes? I would entertain a motion to approve. Diane? Second, Tim. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, the minutes are approved. Thank you. The next issue on the agenda is elections of officers for the calendar year 2020. As you know, we do this every year with the officers of Regional. So I would entertain any nominations or any motions regarding the officers. In your packet, there was information on the roles and responsibilities of the officers.
Since we're at the end of our planning process here, it seems to me for continuity purposes, it would be good to have the continuity of the current officers if they're willing to serve. So I would nominate the current slate to run again. If anybody wants to second that.
I would second it.
Diane seconds. All right. All us willing to continue to serve? Okay. Thank you for the confidence. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. Thank you so much. All right. Next is the status on the Edwards Aquifer HCP. Scott. Someone walk in. There he is.
Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to give you a brief update on the ACP and where we are starting off the year. The most important thing I'd like to bring to you and brief you on is that we're starting a process of doing what we call a rollover options analysis. And this is a managerial tool for the HCP management to begin to give some thoughts and guidance to our implementing committee and our stakeholder committee. As some of you might know, if not, I'll remind you, we have an incidental take permit from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. That was born out of many years of work from the predecessor to the HCP, which was the ERIP. The ERIP process created the ITP. U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service approved it, and now we're looking at from 2013 through 2018. It's a 15-year permit. The first phase is 2013 through 2020. We're now moving from phase 1 and and then moving into phase 2, which is from 2020 to 2028. We're fully into the second phase of the permit. As of January 1st, we kind of cleared the hurdle. We had a successful year last year analyzing what has worked and what has not worked with the first phase. There are a few minor issues that we worked on and have reconciled, but overall we've gotten a good thumbs up from outside third-party reviews, such as the National Academies of Sciences. But as it leads into this year, I'd like to make you aware of the rollover options analysis. The rollover options analysis is we talk about a rollover, and the rollover is a concept that is probably foreign to most of you, but it is basically when we start looking at the end of our permit in 2028, we'll need to be talking with U.S. Fish and Wildlife, we'll need to be talking with stakeholders that are involved in the process, as well as our implementing committee, as well as the board of directors of the EAA, as far as how we would look at moving forward on what might be a second permit, which would be a permit that would be let after 2028 going forward. That permit might look more like a 15-year, or it could be up to a 30-year permit. I think there's a lot of interest in going longer than shorter, but there's a lot of challenges to get to that place. As the ERIP process before the ACP demonstrated, there's a lot of very sophisticated and very intentional interests from a broad variety of parties. So as we look forward into this process, we're doing a rollover options analysis, which is a preliminary study at looking at different routes to move forward towards 2028 when we would have a rollover into a new permit. And that process has just now begun. We've contracted with ICF Consulting. They have a very robust practice in the ACP arena. They're probably the most specialized in the United States at this stage. They're working in 50 different HCPs around the country, and they have expertise in helping organizations and HCPs around the country determine what is the best route going forward. And when we think about rollover options, they're basically different routes towards getting towards 2028. There's nothing prescriptive about the work they're doing, nothing determinative, but it is an interest of trying to lay out options that we can begin to think about as an organization and with our implementing committee and with the stakeholder committee. So I make you aware of that because I'll come back during the year, during the next quarterly meetings, and give you an update of how that's progressing. Because what that does do in the context of Regional, in the long term, there are going to be changes to our organization and what we do. They may not be radical, they could be radical. We just don't know what that looks like yet because it's early in the process. And for us to understand what those variations of the different routes moving towards a rollover into 2028, we'll begin to determine how we move forward and what kind of stakeholder process might make the most sense based on some of their observations. So I share that with you at this point. Like I said, I'll come back and give you an update on how things are progressing. If you have any questions, feel free to always contact me, and I'm more than happy to give you an update or explain this in more depth if you're interested. And that's all I had.
Thank you. Next is a quick update on the BBASC activities. You have a little, some notes in your backup material, but essentially the Water Development Board was asking for all the recommended projects for funding from all the various BBASC by December the 2nd. They received all of that information, those that were going to submit. And in December, the staff was kind of going through the process of reviewing and scoring all those projects. And now they're working toward getting final approval through the executive administrator there at the Water Development Board. So hopefully that will be coming soon, and those that end up getting funded then we'll end up hearing about that very soon. And all the scopes of work, our RFQ developments that are necessary will be moved forward. So we're kind of in this time frame right now where they're making their final selections and decisions on that, on any kind of scientific studies that would be going forward.
Sue, Suzanne, I wanted to bring up one thing that doesn't have to do with this, but has to do with the HCP. I
Oh,
forgot.
I'm
while
sorry.
He was talking. No, it just came to me. There is a newsletter that EAA HCP puts out that comes via email, an email link, and then I think it's also on social media, a link to it. And I guess it's on the website after it comes out a week or so later. So this newsletter is something that I think all of you in Region L should get because it's about the HCP and kind of our area of interest and influence. And one of the things that came up is there was recently a conference of HCPs from all over the U.S. A group has formed that 100 different HCPs are part of, and they have a conference once a year. And this is kind of a new thing. It's just a few years old, so the conferences aren't huge, but they're packed with information that might be relevant as we think about the future and what we're facing with our own HCP. And to that end, there is a fall conference plan next year. I think it's fall of 2020 that will be in Austin that will be about these HCPs all over the U.S. And for people who are interested in water, I think this one might be really a good one to attend. And I just want y'all to have that on your radar. And I don't think they gave us dates in the newsletter, but future newsletters will have the dates.
Okay, great. And I don't know if all of this Region L group has been added to the listserv on the HCP.
I don't know, but I can ask Scott to add. If y'all are in agreement, we can just take the regional group and add it to this.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to unsubscribe, I'm sure all of these usually have a way to unsubscribe, and you can just say you don't want to receive it, but this way you'll be aware of the
It's a
information.
very good newsletter. It'll occasionally have video interviews of different stakeholders in our region. It just has excerpts of things that are going on, the science regarding the endangered species, the research studies that are being done, regular updates, once a month,
I think, no, it's more quarterly.
once a quarter.
Okay. All right. Water Development Board update.
Good morning, everyone. So since the last meeting, the board has issued the socioeconomic impact report, and we have Dr. John Ellis, who performed that analysis, scheduled to come and talk about the regional results at your February meeting. Last week, the board formally appointed the members to the Interregional Planning Council, and so the regional representative is Suzanne Scott. And meeting details with the logistics and the meeting date for the council are still being developed, but once we have that information, we'll share that with the planning groups. The board will consider the draft regional water planning rules, which incorporate the new House Bill 807 requirements at their February 13th meeting. After that, we'll be posted for public comment before the board considers the final rules later this spring. We also have the rulemaking. We're also accepting comments on the proposed flood planning rules, and the comment period closes on February the 3rd. So if you'd like to submit any comments, there's information on how to do so on our website. On the main page, if you look under hot topics. The 2020 SWIFT Bridge application period is also open for February 3rd. And we are accepting applications for fiscal year 20 agricultural water conservation grants, and the deadline to apply for those is February the 19th. And I've got more information on those if anyone wants to see me after the meeting. But are there any questions on that?
Thank you. Next is the chair's report. Just real quickly, she did announce the interregional committee, and you have the letter that I received in front of you regarding the appointments to the Interregional Planning Council. And I will keep you informed as that process moves forward. We haven't set a meeting yet, but there's some information there on those members of that interregional planning group. We have a chair's call coming up on January the 27th. That is where all the chairs kind of have a call together just to make sure that we're all kind of on track to get the various, now of course the report finalized and move forward. So I'll be participating in that call. We did also receive a list, pretty comprehensive list from the Water Development Board, I guess last week, earlier this week, I don't remember, of all the necessary components that we have to have in the regional plan to make sure that it would be considered administratively complete. So there was a long list, and we're making sure that we're looking at that list, making sure that the consultants are aware of all the various pieces of the puzzle, so that we can make sure that when we put together the plan, the interim plan, it has all the necessary components of that. Lauren, is there anything in that list that was different than before, or you know, it seemed pretty standard, but I don't know the nuances. Is there any, or Elizabeth, anything different?
So once we receive the IPPs, we'll do an administrative completeness review, and so there's about 10 items that we're looking for, making sure we have all of the chapters, and we've submitted kind of the like the modeling files and things like that. Once your IPPs administratively complete, there's a pretty exhaustive list of, I think, over 240 specific requirements that we'll be checking for. So we sent that information out to you guys in preparation for that.
So it's pretty detailed, but we're getting close to the end here, so to speak. Also, just to let you know that some of the interim committees of the legislature are meeting, and there was one meeting that happened, I guess, yesterday of the Senate Water and Rural Affairs and Natural Resources and Economic Development Committee. And that committee does have an interim charge to look at future water supply and groundwater regulatory framework. So they did meet yesterday. They had a few panels that were discussing various issues. One of the issues related specifically to what we're talking about, and they talked a lot about ASR, Aquifer Storage and Recovery Projects, and kind of the future of that, and what things that the state's looking at. The Water Development Board staff was there talking a little bit about, I think John Dupnick was at the hearing, giving some information about ASR and sort of the requirements of that. So again, I think it was just more informational, but I just wanted y'all to know that that process has started. So you may, if you're interested in those interim committees, please go onto the legislature website and be sure that you're tracking those things. You know, you can get alerts. You can sign up for alerts of different meetings, different interim committees that are meeting, so that you can make sure that you can stay as involved as you want as the process moves forward. But Hillary, is there a House committee that's also looking at regional planning issues?
They haven't scheduled anything yet. So
Okay.
as of now, it's just the Senate committees. But if they do, I'll definitely make sure.
Okay, terrific. So that's all I have for this time, as the chair's report. Next, we have the discussion and appropriate action regarding the consultant's work and schedule. Good.
It's working, you just need to speak a little louder.
Hello. Okay. Good. Thank you. Okay. My name is Lauren Gonzalez. Let's jump right in. You'll find a list of active projects within the regional area that the consultant team is currently contracted to perform. A couple of projects have concluded since the previous project team list update. Some projects were extended or renewed, and so the end dates have been modified. We don't have any other updates other than that. Any questions? Okay. We'll move on. All right. So the schedule's been updated slightly. The green outline around the month of January is to orient you to where we are today in the current month. We have completed the water management strategy evaluations in task 5 and are rounding out our efforts to allocate water management strategy supplies to some of the WUGs with identified needs and shortages, which will be discussed in agenda item 11 today. And we're continuing work on chapter 6, task 6, and we'll begin running the models for the cumulative effects analysis between now and the February meeting. And we'll discuss the approach planned for that in agenda item, I believe, 13. We're also continuing to work on task 7, mainly with regards to the emergency interconnects information, and we'll discuss that in agenda item 10. And the chapter 8, policy recommendations and unique sites, we're finalizing those efforts, and that will be presented in agenda item 11 by Chair Scott today. And we will also be reaching out to WUGs with regards to the implementation in comparison to the previous plan. We'll be soliciting information and input from them. And so many of you please expect to see an email from us soon about requesting information about the implementation of previous water management strategy projects that were included in the 2016 plan. So in conclusion, at the February meeting, we will present the results of cumulative effects analysis, which is in chapter 6, and we will present the IPP for adoption so that we can submit it to the Texas Water Development Board by this March 3rd IPP deadline. After this, there will be 1, potentially 3 public hearings, and then a period of time where we will receive comments and revise the IPP as necessary, and final plan is expected to be, well, the final plan is due October 14th, 2020. Are there any questions on the schedule?
You do have a budget update, I think, that was also submitted.
Yes, ma'am.
You can see that handout in front of you, just to kind of give you a sense of where we are relative to all the various tasks that she just mentioned and where we are sort of financially as we move forward. We're getting close to the end here. We just wanted to make sure that y'all got an update on that.
And do we have the dates of the public hearings yet?
I think that's going to be an agenda item later today. And so one thing to point out in this budget status update is that for task 5A, of the $373,405 that were allocated for task 5A, there's $30,405 that has been set aside for subtask 21-2 regarding additional water management strategies. Since there are no newly identified strategies to evaluate, we plan to utilize these funds for currently contracted 5A water management strategy evaluations. Are there any questions on the budget status update?
Okay, next, are you ready to move on to item number 10?
Yes, ma'am.
Presentation of emergency interconnects information.
So emergency interconnects information is included as chapter 7, as a section in chapter 7. Previously in the 2016 Regional Water Plan, a subcommittee was formed to collect confidential information from water user groups And then that information was reported to the Texas Water Development Board in a confidential report. And the interconnection summary information, so basically just summaries of the number of interconnects and the number of entities that have one or more interconnections, that summary information was presented to RWPG during the previous cycle. For this cycle, the Texas Water Development Board has given us some flexibility on whether to collect confidential information or high-level information. And at the November 7th, 2019 meeting, you all, the RWPG, directed us to pursue collecting only high-level information. And we're presenting high-level information today. And we will report the required high-level information to the Texas Water Development Board in the form of Chapter 7. So there will not be a separate report. Because we're collecting this high-level information, it eliminates the need for confidentiality. So the minimum requirements for this round of the regional water plan for emergency interconnects is to identify the methodology used for collecting this information and identify who is connected to whom on an emergency basis. So the methodology used for this round of the planning was to use the South Central Texas Regional Water Plan confidential report from 2016 as the basis. So we use that as the basis of information and then use the Texas Commission on Environmental Quality's Drinking Water Watch website to identify new or previously unidentified emergency interconnects that were based on community water systems with an identified emergency source of water. And then took this compiled list of information and met with Tom Taggart with the City of San Marcos. Thank you very much for your time again. And he reviewed and provided some input. And we also solicited input from several WUGs and then submitted a survey yesterday to solicit input from all Region L WUGs to collect information on emergency interconnects. So in summary, just a sort of comparison by the numbers, in the 2016 plan, there were 25 WUGs that responded to surveys and emails with 35 interconnections identified. Using this methodology that for the 2021 plan, which does not include all of the information that we're expecting to receive from the WUGs as part of the survey that we sent yesterday, we have identified 32 WUGs that have emergency interconnections, and that's just so far. This will very likely change once we get more responses from the WUGs. Of those 32 WUGs, there were 41 interconnections, so 26 had one identified emergency interconnection compared to last round there were 19. 2020, in this plan, there have been 3 WUGs identified with 2 emergency interconnections compared to 3 last time, and both plans had 3 WUGs with 3 identified emergency interconnections. And so in the previous plan, this is the only information that was submitted, the information on the left-hand side. So the previous plan did not identify in the chapter who was connected to whom. And so that's a distinction between the last go-round and this go-round. We are identifying who is connected to whom because that's the minimum requirement. And so this is just a draft of listing of who is connected to whom on an emergency interconnection basis. And we expect for this list to change because we've solicited additional input from water user groups. And so this is a table is broken out into 3 slides. So this is 1 of 3, 2 of 3, and 3 of 3. So the next steps are to compile and update the interconnect survey response information and include the emergency interconnections methodology and updated table into Chapter 7 of the IPP. And there will be no separate report submitted to the Texas Water Development Board because there is no need for confidentiality. Are there any questions?
So when do you need the information back from everyone that may be reviewing this list to make sure that it is accurate?
We've requested as soon as possible, but no later than February 14th.
Because do we need to adopt this at our next meeting, or would it be just part of a plan adoption?
It will be part of the IPP adoption.
Okay. So I would just encourage any of you to please look at this list, make sure if there's any changes that need to be made, to let Lauren know as soon as possible. Or if there's anything that's been left out, please make sure that she is aware. They've tried very hard to reach out to all the entities, but sometimes, some people are more responsive than others. So just any help that y'all can give in making sure that we get this information out to those that need to see it, particularly if they're on the list. We would want to make sure that they are aware that they're being represented in this way. Okay?
Suzanne.
Yes.
So Lauren, I noticed that the City of Schertz is missing off that list, that we have an agreement with to provide water back to the city.
City of Schertz would provide water to whom?
SAWS would provide water to the City of Schertz.
Okay. I thought that I had added that, but I will make sure that it's in there if it's not already.
Tom, is the city of San Marcos not on there because they have their own backups via 2 different systems?
We're interconnected with Kyle. We have an interconnect with Kyle.
So in other words,
We would supply Kyle in the event that.
I know, but would Kyle supply you?
It could be configured that way if we took out the device and turned it around. If they had capacity at that time.
Well, but what I was asking is, since you have 2 separate systems, you have aquifer water and you have surface water, would those provide a backup, and should they be
We
listed?
blend those into systems so they don't count as separate, interconnects.
So Tom, what you described, where it could potentially happen in the future, that could be considered a potential future emergency interconnect, and that is one of the questions that we asked in our survey. So that's also worth pointing out, that if you do have emergency interconnects, and even if you don't have emergency interconnects, if your entity knows of any potential future emergency interconnects, please let us know, because we just need to describe those in general terms.
Okay. Next item is discussion and appropriate action regarding presentation of chapters for the regional water plan. So I guess we'll start with presentation of chapter statuses. Status of chapters.
So there are 11 chapters that are included in the regional water plan, also including an executive summary and several appendices. I've only listed the chapters here. Chapter 1, we have posted that on the website, and we've received comments from the RWPG. And at this point, we're pending direction from you all today on the comments received, and that's, I think, in the next item that we'll discuss. And then, based on that direction, B&B will finalize Chapter 1 for inclusion in the IPP for you all to adopt. Chapter 2 is very near to being finalized, and it will be uploaded on the website shortly. Same thing with Chapter 3. Chapter 4 has been uploaded to the website, and the RWPG is currently providing comments. I think the deadline for providing comments is the end of the month. For Chapter 5, I've gone ahead and I've separated them by subsection because Chapter 5 is the real bulk of the plan. 5.1 is just a very short description of each evaluated water management strategy. Information is fairly easy to put together. So this chapter is in progress and it will be uploaded to the website shortly. 5.2 is the individual water management strategy evaluations. Sponsors have seen all of these. This is all information that we presented to you all in January, May, August, and November. And so these are just going to be the written sections. Each water management strategy is 20 or so pages long, and there are 33 water management strategies. Chapter 5.3 is what we will be presenting to you all today. It is the water user group water supply plans by county for entities that have identified needs as identified in Chapter 4, and we'll talk about that. Chapter 5.4 are the water supply plans for wholesale water providers, and we'll talk about that today too. Chapter 5.5 is a subsection required for water conservation, and that's also in progress. Chapter 6 is currently ongoing, and it will be presented at the February meeting, pending today's direction from you all regarding the identification of recommended and alternative water management strategies. So once the RWPG identifies which water management strategies are recommended, then we can roll that into this Chapter 6 cumulative effects analysis and start performing all of the modeling. And we'll discuss that. And I think agenda item 13. Chapter 7, drought management. That chapter is mostly done. It's just awaiting updated information based on the emergency interconnects data from the survey responses that I just mentioned in the previous agenda item. Chapter 8, the policy recommendations and unique sites. That chapter was developed by the policy recommendations work group, and Chair Scott is presenting on that today. And we've received comments, and I will be going over those comments received and requesting direction from you all on how to proceed on some of those or substantial comments today.
Okay.
And then once we get those, then we can finalize that for inclusion in the IPP. Chapter 9, the water infrastructure funding recommendations. That's really something that we'll basically have a placeholder in the IPP because that work is really done after the IPP is adopted. Same thing portion with Chapter 10. Chapter 10 will include relevant portions, but for the most part, the bulk of Chapter 10 will be added after IPP adoption. And then the comparison to the previous regional water plan. This chapter is in progress. We're soliciting information from WUGS on the implementation of 2016's water management strategies, and we'll include relevant portions of that in the IPP. Are there any questions on this?
Okay, so then we'll move to number, and y'all all, I assume you saw in front of you this kind of list that she just sort of went through, the table of each of the chapters, and that was again another handout. So I guess we're going to move to presentation of Chapter 5 tables. Is that's number?
Actually,
Or do you want to go over the comments now?
We can do whichever you prefer.
Okay, let's go over the comments. This big list right here,
Sure.
so we can get some direction on those.
Okay. So these are separated out first by chapter. So there's Chapter 1, and then later towards the end is Chapter 8. And then it's separated by the comments that we've received that are more substantial in nature, and then those that are more editorial. So the first one of the substantial comments from Chapter 1 is with regards to the way that the mean annual precipitation is presented in terms of first by county and then by river basin. And so our proposed response is to edit the language so that it's more consistent. We're comparing apples to apples, counties to counties, river basins to river basins. So that's the first one. The second comment is with regards to the summary for GBRA as a wholesale water provider. Our proposed response is to incorporate that GBRA is in the process of developing groundwater supplies. We also received a comment about CRWA's section about wholesale water providers, about how CRWA owns its run-of-river rights, we'll add that. The next one is CRWA owns and operates treatment plants at Lake Dunlap on the Guadalupe River, and all of that information. So we'll incorporate that information into the summaries for CRWA. We had a duplicate section where ARWA was listed twice. We'll remove that section. The next one is about the aquifer being used for livestock purposes. Livestock isn't mentioned, so we'll go ahead and add that. The next ones are about water rights and clarifications on amounts and who owns the water rights, and so we'll make sure to include that and update that in the section. This page 1-33, section 1.8.4.3, the last sentence, is with regards to the WECO aquifer, and that I think it talks about the 40 CFS being the average spring flow, and whether that's still true. So this information is listed in the sort of the preamble to this subsection. So we will reiterate these sources, which are from Texas Water Development Board reports on these on these particular aquifers. The next comment about section 1.10.2 asks about this water management strategy for, I think, for saws. So this section is specifically specifically to summarize the 2016 Regional Water Plan. And so it includes a selection of sort of major water management strategies that were representative of the 2016 plan. And so that's why that particular water management strategy is mentioned. It's not meant to be indicative of what's in the 2021 plan. So, the SAWS seawater desal strategy was included in the write-up, and so it wasn't. We can incorporate this editorial comment. I think the question was basically to remove it from the summary from the 2016 plan, the summary of the 2016 plan from chapter 1, removing this water management strategy because it's no longer a water management strategy for SAWS. We can do that. It's up to you all what you would like for us to do. It was, though, included as a 2016 water management strategy, which is why it was incorporated into the summary of the 2016 plan. So we might need direction from you all on that one.
Can we just add a sentence that says some of these, parentheses, some of these are not in the 2021 plan?
Yeah, definitely. We can add that to the sort of preamble before we start listing them all. Would that be agreeable?
It would be difficult to, because since they were part of the 2016 plan, and if anyone was doing any sort of cross-referencing, I'm not sure if, because I'm sure there's other projects in the plan that are not moving forward, right? Is that the only project from 16 that's not in 21?
That is not the only project from 2016 that is not in the 2021 plan.
So we would have to be consistent if we were going to do that. So, is there any concerns, Robert?
No.
Just that it's noted that it was then and not now?
Yes.
Okay.
And yeah, we can add that sentence that Diane suggested.
If there's going to be several of them, can I propose that whatever statement you put in the preamble be emphasized, either underlined or bolded or something, to make clear that some of the stuff we're talking about is no longer going to be in the 2021 plan?
Yes.
Yeah, it's dynamic. I mean, this is a dynamic process. That's why we do it every 5 years, because it reflects changes both on the needs and the supplies. And so that's exactly why this process moves forward and is reviewed on a 5-year cycle.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay.
There's a comment about the city of Goliad not being listed in the table of water loss audit reports. They were not, we got this information directly from the Texas Water Development Board, and so if they're not listed, they're either not required to submit a water loss audit, or a water loss audit was not submitted in 2015, 2016, or in 2017.
So should we note that then, if a city is not listed, it means that we did not receive, just having your comment there so that if someone does wonder why someone's not listed, you could just state it.
But do we know the reason they're not on?
They either didn't submit, they didn't submit anything, or they didn't have a loss,
Or weren't required.
or weren't required.
But do we have to put what the reason?
Status, right?
Yeah. In other words, I think it's 3,000 connections and you have to report. So are they bigger than 3,000 and therefore they did not, they're smaller than? Okay, well then that's why they're up there.
Maybe we could note that if it's a 3,000 connection, that is the requirement for submitting from reporting.
That 3,000 was the number, but if y'all would verify that it is still the number.
It is 3,000.
The smart people are shaking their head yes.
I think that's a good point, to note that this is only for those WUGs that are over the 3,000.
I got a note that it's 3,300 right
Okay.
now.
I'm sorry, what did you say?
I've got a note that it's now for 3,300 connections.
Oh, okay.
Inflation.
Okay.
All right. For SAWS, a comment was made about the produced water for SAWS was 241,429 acre feet, and in our table we had included 241,038. And a question was asked of the reason for the discrepancy. SAWS in the water loss audit report reported 78,542,311,339 gallons, which converted to acre feet is 241,037 acre feet. So that's very close to what the comment was. However, the Texas Water Development Board uses their own methodology to correct the data, and it's a very long and involved process in how they're corrected various information and received for the water loss audits. And so the information we're presenting in this table is actually the corrected Texas Water Development Board data. And so the corrected data shows a very similar amount, which when converted to acre feet is 241,429. So that's the reason for the discrepancy. I think what we can do though is in the preamble before the table explain that we're including the Texas Water Development Board corrected data.
Okay.
And then the rest of the comments for chapter 1 are editorial in nature, and we don't necessarily need to go through those. And the next section is chapter 8 comments.
Okay. Do you want to go through the comments, or do you
It's-
want me to outline the?
It's up to you.
I guess if Hillary could just bring up you just have kind of a list of the highlights. And this is from Sarah's staff's perspective, so others that worked on the committee may have different highlights. But the Chapter 8 work group met about 3 times, did meet 3 times to review and update the policy recommendations. So, you know, a lot of them were editorial, updating old information with new information. But there's some highlights here that Hillary's going to get on the screen that we can go forward with, and then we can address these comments. No, we do not have this handed out. I'm sorry. They were providing it to me for kind of talking points, but I figured it's a lot. So I just didn't want to read all this without you having it in front of you and saying, what did she say? So we can get copies of
Yeah,
this to
we can
everybody.
email this out to the planning group.
Oh, wait. Okay, I went away for a minute. So here are some of the highlights. We recommended that the Water Development Board fund and support interregional planning group's recommendations. There was a recommendation that the state legislature develop a process of requiring public notice for projects in areas where there's no groundwater conservation district. I think, if I remember correctly, there was just an issue of there's no body that would be, no entity that would be there, so it would be helpful to have another way to have a public notice. Updating the language to the coordination of the regional water planning and groundwater management area processes. Now, this was written by several members that were on the committee. Don't know if y'all want to highlight anything on that. I know Tim and Stephen were involved in that, but it was a kind of a different way of use of the MAGs, the managed available groundwater. Is there anybody that wants to highlight that? I know it was a long time ago that we met, but and then there was a recommendation that the GAMs be updated every 10 years and that sufficient funding be allocated to the Water Development Board in order to accomplish that. Then there was a new section, Charlie proposed by the Hill Country Alliance regarding the need for the TCEQ to clarify surface water return flow rules. Do you want to say anything about that, Charlie?
It's confusing, and TCEQ doesn't really seem to have a very good handle on how they're parsing out those return flows, and I just think that would be a great thing for them to
clarify.
Yeah.
Okay.
Especially for planning purposes.
So for that particular one, I had reached out to you to get some clarification because I think the wording was just not totally clear, and I think you had recommended that we could just strike that one. So this is in section 8.4.4 of the draft chapter 8, and so our plan is to remove that section per Charlie's request.
Yes, the complicated bits, for certain, I don't mind having the simple sentence as a general recommendation. But my previous verbiage is complicated and difficult to understand, and I'm not even sure I really understand it. So
maybe
I'm happy to drop that really complicated bit, but I would be happy to keep this simple, recommendation. That I think we all understand.
Okay, so some, maybe just simple statement that would say the need for the TCEQ to clarify surface water return flow rules
Yeah, I'm happy with that.
versus the
sentence.
detail
That's
that you
right.
provided.
Yes.
A recommendation to the state legislature to add a new chapter to the water code to include reuse in the state's administration of water rights. And a recommendation to the state legislature to continue funding the TCEQ and other entities in monitoring water quality of the 5 river and stream segments designated as being unique ecological value. And then a recommendation that the state legislature provide definite direction on a continued stakeholder involvement and scientific review of the process for evaluating potential changes to the adopted environmental flow standard. Currently, there's the legislation that was originally drafted, doesn't really contemplate kind of what we do next. So we need some definite direction on that. Whatever way the legislature wants to go, we just need to know kind of what's next. Are we going to continue, or is it going to stop after the process that we've already gone through? Because many of the standards, they all had kind of a 10-year time frame on them. And believe it or not, we're getting to the point where if we were going to have to go to the next level of updating those, some of that needs to start sooner rather than later. And there's really no guidance on, getting the BBES back together, figuring the whole process out. Because that took, a couple of years or so in advance of the timeline that we had to prepare them to get that process moving, a several-year process. And then a recommendation of the state legislature to review all components of the SWIFT program in an effort to streamline its processes. We had a lot of conversation about this. No one wants to look a gift horse in the mouth. That's not the process here, but I think that there are opportunities to make that a little bit more streamlined so that more entities could potentially participate in the funding. And several entities had expressed some concerns about how cumbersome the process is right now. So we just think there needs to be kind of a looking back and saying, okay, what's worked well and what hasn't worked well, and maybe there's some process improvement that can be done. And then a recommendation for other planning groups. Because we so successfully went through our guiding principles process and came up with that document that we included in our bylaws at the back of our bylaw book, that we thought maybe that process could be helpful for some other groups within the regional planning process if they needed to kind of identify how, any principles that they would like to go through for understanding and coming to common ground on terms and how things were going to be done relative to the regional planning process in their respective regions. So those were the highlighted recommendations. There were others in there, but these were the ones that we pulled out as being more substantive. We did include, we still kept, right, Hillary, I know we mentioned here about the funding for the groundwater modeling. Did we keep the recommendation for the surface water funding of the modeling on all of the rivers? Because some of those needed to be, the WAMs needed to be updated, and some of them have been funded and some of them haven't. But I know we had a recommendation in there for that.
Yes, there is. And in fact, there's a comment that we would like the RWPG's direction on, and we can address that. I also wanted to add to this Chapter 8 highlights is that our Chapter 8 complies with House Bill 807, which was passed by the legislature in 2019, which requires a specific section related to legislative or policy recommendations. And so what we have done is included sort of a preamble to each topic, and then we have a legislative recommendation or other recommendation. And the other recommendation could be recommendations to Texas Water Development Board, recommendations to TCEQ, whichever.
All right. Thank you, Hillary. Now we can go through the comments that we've received on this chapter. Yes, he's going to go. It's Susan.
Sorry, that took a little time. So the first substantive comment about Chapter 8 is that Section 8.4.3 provides a recommendation that there should be funding for updating the WAMs. But in the preamble to this section, we only discuss the GSA WAM. We don't discuss the Nueces River WAM. And so this is the section that the comment is related to. And so we've got this legislative recommendation about the Guadalupe-San Antonio River Basin being updated to include the available hydrologic data. But we don't mention the Nueces River Basin WAM in this.
We should.
So we'd like your direction on whether or not we should include the Nueces River Basin WAM in this legislative recommendation.
Well, I'm all for saying that it too needs updating, but as far as saying that it has a new drought of record, I think it depends on how you look at that drought, and I want to be careful in how we say that.
Sure. I'm not sure that the comment is necessarily aimed at having the recommendation mention the drought of record.
Okay.
So I would suggest not mentioning that statement and just including the Nueces River Basin WAM in the actual recommendation.
I think that's appropriate. Does anyone have any concerns about that? Okay.
Section 8.6.6 is with regards to it talks about well, we don't mention the drought management tool as a separate tool that's being used, so we are proposing to update the verbiage to address this comment so that we're discussing the new drought management tool that the Texas Water Development Board released in October, I think, of 2019. So it's a very minor change. We can make that.
Okay. The next.
Section 8.7.4, it says, we believe that SB2 should also be mentioned and then referenced when the Texas In-Stream Flow Studies program is discussed under other recommendations. So let me scroll to section 8.7.4. And we would like your direction on this.
Just mentioning it, that it's happened and those studies are fine.
Suzanne, if I could maybe clarify a little bit, SB2 is what instituted the Texas In-Stream Flow Program, so I would consider those one and the same.
Yeah.
So I don't know if that was the objective of the comment.
Yeah, I think you could mention that, because I think the first sentence said something like it's appreciative of to form the SB3 that established and funded the environmental flow process. We could easily say that we're equally as appreciative of the SB2 process. I don't think it came with as much funding, but but yes, I mean, I think that was, we could come up with a sentence that states that, to recognize that process has been ongoing within the basin as well. Would that be responsive to the comment?
Yes, ma'am. I believe so.
Anybody have any concerns about that? Okay. We can help you with the sentence. Maybe Steve, if you wouldn't mind helping her craft something, that would be great. Okay.
The next one is section 8.8.3. Should there be a recommendation to make regional water planning a 10-year cycle rather than 5 years? There is not, let's see, 8.8.3, let me scroll down.
Well, I mean, I would say that given the rapid development and growth of our state and population projections continue to change, and obviously we mentioned the comment earlier that even water supply strategies are changing even over a 5-year period based on better information and science and engineering. I mean, there are changes that are happening pretty quickly given the rapid development of our state, I think if you went to a 10-year cycle, could be,
It could be California in one time.
yeah, we just wouldn't have the most current information, both the need and the supply side. Does anyone have any strong recommendation to change or to adopt this comment? Or-
To me, climate change alone would make you not want to go to a 10-year.
My understanding is that the climate models don't go out beyond 5 years, so it would not be a good idea to cut the planning cycle shorter than climate models predict.
I don't think it's a good idea on any level.
I think one practical reason to not go to a 10-year cycle is just maintaining continuity in the group over the span of a single cycle. You know, because there'll be considerable personnel change probably in a 10-year period versus 5. That could do, you know, good things to the process, I would think.
Absolutely.
Growth has to be looked at as well. And we're, a portion of our planning region is probably at the very top of the list of growth areas and continued potential growth areas in the state. And I can see maybe a rural area somewhere in a planning group that if nothing has changed, you don't need to change your plan. I can understand some other rules going along with the lack thereof when we look at growth. But
So I think it seems to me we've got consensus to not have a recommendation to change the planning cycle from 5-year to 10 years, keep it as it is. Does that seem to be okay?
yes.
All right.
And that's the last substantive comment for Chapter 8.
Do we have any other comments that would be like to be offered by the planning group relative to Chapter 8 or at this point also Chapter 1?
Can I go back to section 8.4.4, actually? So this was the section that was initially added, and it was added, but the Chapter 8 Policy Work Group Committee didn't actually have an opportunity to review this and discuss it at length during our work group sessions. And so there was confusion about the wording and what this meant, and so I reached out to Mr. Flanton, and he said we could strike it. But then today, there's new direction for us to keep some of this. It would really benefit me if I could have a bit more direction on what this is pertaining to.
Yes, Charlie.
Yeah, what page are you on?
It is page 8-8 of it's section 8.4.4.
This is the one that you brought up?
Yeah. I'm just trying to find the wording.
I don't think that's it right there.
That's it.
Yeah.
Lauren, can I talk to you this afternoon offline to not waste this, or do we need to make a decision on it as a group?
Well, I think the whole group, this is our chance.
This is our chance.
But, I mean, what if you just put a period at the end of wastewater permitting on the second line and didn't go into all that and just said, TCEQ clarify the rules for wastewater permitting?
I think that's what we discussed earlier. We didn't have this
But
in
I
front of
think
us.
it was reuse, wasn't it? It wasn't just wastewater permitting. It was wastewater permitting
It was
involving
return
reuse.
flows was the last thing. This is different. This is wastewater permitting, and I think the TCEQ has finally passed their new rule allowing.
Oh, that's right.
So this might be moved at this
Yeah.
point. I think that's been done by TCEQ. That came out at the end of December.
We met before that happened.
Oh, okay.
Right.
So maybe the whole question.
TCEQ has new rules regarding a combination of TPDES
Okay.
and TLAP
Uh-huh.
based on storage capacity. So I think that we can strike all of that because they listened to us last time.
Okay,
I agree.
that would be easy enough. So there would be.
No chapter 844.
Thank you very much.
Okay, no other comments? Yes, sir.
Simple question. I'm wondering why the region and/or the state are not considering all water supplies. And specifically, what I'm talking about is weather modification, rainfall enhancement, and an emergent supply, probably for now, but maybe a general supply later, is atmospheric water generation. Simple question.
I know we have talked about that in the past. There's a statement here that says that we urge the state to continue to support the existing weather modification program. We do see that there is some, good work going on there. I think that we've studied in the past plans if that could be a actual water supply.
That was with brush management. I don't think we ever really got the weather modification up to a water management strategy.
Yeah, I remember it was discussed. Maybe there was a presentation about it or something.
Yeah,
That's what it was.
presentation.
Thank you. There was a presentation. We just haven't been able to get to a point where we can have it as a reliable source to supply a need. So that's why I think it's not really come up as a water management strategy that someone would consider sponsoring and moving forward with and developing, like some of the other water management strategies.
And to maybe add on to your comment about a reliable need, the Water Development Board has specific requirements. It has to have a firm yield in order to meet a need, particularly for municipal and industrial uses in plants. So we haven't been able to demonstrate that necessarily with these kinds of strategies. However, statements like this have been in the previous plans to support it from a more general perspective. But as far as meeting a very specific need, we've not been able to demonstrate that.
Well, don't our water management strategies have to have a sponsor also?
Yes.
Somebody that claims it?
Well, there are some water management strategies that are general in nature, for example, advanced water conservation, and that includes many, many WUGs. And so if the Texas Water Development Board were to study this enough and then develop a tool that we could use to identify the yield and the costs associated with such a water management strategy, then that could be something in the future that could be implemented.
That's a good point. Thank you, Mark. So it's something that we've discussed and had presentations on over the years. It's just, we can't, based on the recipe that we have to use with water management strategies defined through the regional water planning process, we can't have a firm yield project that we can say this supply can meet this need on a consistent basis.
And that's the only criteria then?
It is a requirement that we have, as part of the regional water planning process, that we can do that. Now, if there were more study here, I think you're going to talk about the fact that y'all have done some work on this, and we had a presentation. I think it was, we had a presentation.
Yeah, what I was going to offer, and I don't know if this will help put Blaine's issue down the road a bit, but if we were just to strengthen that language a little bit and say, not simply support, but encourage the further study of, so that we're not saying the same thing, but we're kind of maybe incorporating other elements of that. We would like the state to study it further, see if they can. I don't know if this potentially in the long run has a positive effect to counter the impacts of climate changing, things like that. During those times of drought, to enhance possibilities of rainfall and changing climate. I don't know.
So he's suggesting that kind of using, I think you're highlighting what we said under rainwater harvesting, maybe using that same encourages the future study of, and maybe you could even say the same words, encourages the study of the effectiveness of weather modification program to be a future water supply source or something like that. Strategy, yeah. Would that satisfy? It just needs a little bit more study and understanding of how it could become a water management strategy at this point.
It probably has the biggest potential of supporting, the irrigation and with livestock and domestic uses plan, because those aren't necessarily required to be firm supplies. But again, in order to be able to quantify that, I think the recommendation could be that the state continues supporting the current program and development of, additional technologies in this area.
Okay. I think that's a good point. Thank you. So maybe, should we add to that statement the water supply for irrigation and livestock purposes? Or just in general?
I would say in general.
Just in general? Okay. All right. I think that's a good point. Thank you. Yes, sir.
You ready to move on?
Yes.
Since we got rid of 8.44, I also want to look at getting rid of 8.104.
8.104. Can we look?
0.4.
Sorry.
8.104. Okay.
Counties having additional authority for land use planning. This is a planning group. I don't think it's a regulatory group, and that's what I think that's talking about. Counties do not regulate water, the availability of water, the supply of water. County-wide groundwater districts do. Groundwater districts do. River authorities. Cities through their utilities do. But right now, counties don't have that authority. So I would think there's a need for this in this plan.
Does anybody have strong opinion on the proposal put forth by Mr. Puente?
Do we have any counties that do not have any groundwater districts, or?
There are some, yes.
There are some, and why would we deny a county the ability to manage the growth?
The county doesn't have the authority now anyway, even without groundwater districts.
This says it should have, not that it does have.
I'm sorry?
This note says that it ought to have, not that it currently does have.
Because they don't.
Right.
That would be a matter of opinion, though, when you say should have.
Yes.
Well, that's what, I'm just reading what the note says.
Right,
It's
and
not
that's what I
my
want to
opinion,
get
I'm
rid
just
of.
saying.
That's what I want to get rid of.
Does anyone have a strong opinion about that we should weigh in on this issue? I think this is a bigger issue than us as it relates to county authorities, and it's been a big issue in the legislature forever. And, is there, giving counties more authority in land use planning has been an ongoing debate. And I guess the question is this something that we need to dive into, or is this something that, obviously, it's a conversation that's had on many levels? Does it need to be here, is the question. And he's proposing that we really don't need to weigh in on this. Does anyone have?
GBA says that we better not have it in there too. So.
Okay. So.
I represent municipalities on this board, and I would say, leave that sleeping dog alone.
Which means
it comes up every session about the county getting. Counties do not have ordinance-making abilities other than those that have been specifically granted to them by the state, basically on an individual basis. Very few times it happens where it's far sweeping or area and county is included, except a few times like burn bans and a few things like that.
And apparently our county's representatives are not present today.
We have a commissioner over here.
Oh, Commissioner.
See, I'll tell you what, it would just be nice to know in the counties that do not have water districts, okay? And there are quite a few. And what happens is the communication through the counties sometimes are lacking in smaller counties. And Mr. Middleton is 100% correct. We do not have ordinance-making ability whatsoever besides, I think, 3 things we can do, and the state gave us that authority to do such, that the towns can. But it would be nice if the counties would be able to, if there was a water plan, if there was a project going into a county, it would be nice that county is notified of that project. And I think this is something where this might have stemmed from, and I firmly believe that all counties, if there is going to be a project that is going to be inside of a county, that county commissioner's court should be notified that that project is going into that county.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. It should be notified, which is very different than land use planning, which is this is about county regulatory authority, which is this about. And so that's why I'm advocating that to be taken out. But you're absolutely right about things like that,
Or
especially in
change the
counties don't
language.
have.
You
Yes.
say, if a water project in a non-represented water district represented county should be notified.
I thought we added that somewhere else,
Well, we might
notification.
have,
But we had this discussion in that work group
Yeah,
on
we
this
did.
right here.
Yeah, we did have the conversation. So the issue here, I think that we're getting some consensus around is that counties should be, counties where there's, are you saying counties overall or counties where there is no water district should be
No, I would say
informed?
counties overall,
Okay.
because there is the water districts protect the resource in counties that do have water districts, but ones that do not, and there are quite a few that do not. And it should at least be able to go to the judge and commissioners of that county about the resource. But now, I go ahead, sir.
A question, don't some counties appoint groundwater district management and not elected? And some are not, some are elected. some
Don't
are
fund, they're not funded. It's my understanding, and Tim can correct me if I'm wrong, is that the voters vote in the water districts, but that they also cannot vote in giving them any funds to operate.
But not all counties.
Not all
no,
counties.
no.
And there are water districts, but they're not funded. You have some have water districts, but the voters voted not to fund them. So, so I'm not really opposed at all to say give counties more authority. I think that they just need to be notified of these projects coming in their county.
But the specific language in here is additional authority for land use planning and for regulating development based on water availability. Our role here is planning, not regulatory, and that's what I'm getting at.
Yeah. So I think that you've got consensus to remove that 8.10.4. I'm not hearing any strong objections to your recommendation. I think the issue is, do we need, how to resolve the question of notice. I think we did have, I thought she showed a notice issue up there relative to if there's not a groundwater district, but you're really talking more holistically than that. So, I mean, I can see, because if you take that to the, I mean, if you're in a municipal, I mean, like a large county, like, I'm going to use Bear County as an example, would that then require, and maybe you do it already, I don't know, do you inform, when you're implementing your water strategies, do you let the county know that that's happening?
In an informal way. It's not a thing that we have to do, but it's a sort of a courtesy. Obviously Nelson Wolf and the county commissioners, I just happen to know them, so it might be in passing that they're notified, but it's not a formal way.
I think if our county people were here, they would be advocating strongly to be notified.
I think so too.
In a formal way.
In a formal,
Yes.
way.
I'm sorry, would someone clarify, notified of what? Development and implementation of a water management strategy, or development of a subdivision or land use?
A water management strategy. If a water, he said if a water project is going to be coming into your county, so then that the commissioner's court should be notified. So that would mean if someone's going to drill a new well, I guess, to that extent.
Well field.
A well field, or if it's a water management strategy that's going to be.
Yes.
Implemented.
So maybe to keep it tight into the regional water planning process, that notice would be if any water management strategy
Is to be
identified in this plan is going to be implemented in a county, that county commissioner's court should be notified. Is that what we're saying?
pretty much.
I think we ought to leave it alone. I mean, if you're a developer and you go out and buy a 200-acre tract of land and want to drill your own well, and you can, There's not a water conservation district.
Right.
And you're going to supply the water to the 400 houses you build on that 200 acres and pave the streets to county standards. That's your business.
Well, but Gary, you wouldn't necessarily, what we're saying is anything implemented by this group, a water management strategy, that wouldn't fall under that.
That's a private development.
Yeah.
This is any of the, because we have to stay within the bounds of what we do
What we
here.
do.
If a water management strategy that's identified in this plan is being implemented, that county is notified. That's I think what he's saying.
The county judge and commissioner's court should be notified.
And when you're, let's just go to, let me use as an example, let's go throw this out there. Let's talk about Gonzales County and the well fields that are there and who owns them and who leases the properties. Now, it's fine.
But they have a groundwater district.
Okay? But
So
take
they
a county
know.
that, take a county that doesn't. I mean, I'm just saying, I personally am not comfortable saying that, I'm not gonna have a problem with, the state should look into notice and how notice is given when a water supply project is being considered for implementation within a county. I don't have a problem with that.
Well,
But anything beyond that,
But there is a difference between a project and a strategy, right? And all we have to notify, or we should be notifying if we choose to do this, is of a strategy.
One in the plan, yeah.
Right.
yeah, the one.
Which is very different than a project.
okay. Yeah, okay, I can see
Because
that as well.
And if it
we had a
becomes-
strategy of ocean desal, and, it's off the books now.
For now.
Well, yeah.
So,
Corpus is
as a
getting-
formal courtesy to a non-represented county, I think it would behoove us to put in as a policy issue to notify them that this has been planned for their area within the bounds of regional water.
Yeah, if it's, I could agree with that if a water management strategy is being considered for implementation within a county, then the county commissioner's court should be notified. I don't have a problem with that.
And I'm assuming now there is not, Elizabeth, is there a requirement, a notice requirement as part of this process that specifically for counties? I know that there's, take it to the library, you have to do certain things like that, but is there a notice requirement?
I believe so, especially when we're talking about the IPP and
Yes.
publication of the IPP hearing notice. I can confirm.
Yeah, just because we may have that notice requirement already.
It goes to the county clerks. Is that the question? Or county
There
clerk?
may be a separate notice to.
Well, the county clerk is there for
Municipality.
a posting perspective, right?
Well,
Yes, the
Make
each
certain
county
we have
judge
something.
of a county located in whole or part in the planning area receives the notice
Okay,
of the hearing.
of the hearing,
Hearing.
not necessarily the list of the projects.
And they're gonna get a thing about this tall that they would have to rifle through to figure out if there's anything that has anything to do with their county. I'm not sure that is what we all intended.
But I'll tell you, it's just a notice, and I'll tell you what happens. Same thing with injection wells. We all represent the people, the same people we work for, right? And it's the public, okay? So, and what would normally happen is if it goes to the county clerk, she takes it, I'll use an injection well, for example. She takes the application for the injection well, goes to the county clerk, she sticks it on the bulletin board, and that's it. That's how it used to be in our county. But now, and I imagine some of your smaller counties are exactly that way. And so some of your larger counties, they're more, a little bit more, I shouldn't say advanced, but they have a little bit, they've been able to learn a little bit quicker, I guess, because of the staff that they have. Some of your smaller counties don't have the staff. So that injection well bulletin goes on the bulletin board, nobody looks at it. We fixed that. Okay? Now, this is exactly, all this would take, if it goes to the county clerk, it's exactly where it's going to go, is on that bulletin board, and none of the commissioners' court walks by there. Should we? Yes. But you remember, you have a revolving door every 4 years, usually, and that revolving door, it takes 4 years to know what you're doing, to learn it. Once you learn, then you start feeling the ropes, then you might go look at the bulletin board. Well, 4 years have gone by. You have injection well stacks this tall, including that water plan this tall, but at least that was given to that county judge. Now I'll give you another scenario. If it goes to the county judge, sometimes you're smaller, the county judges do not get along with the commissioners, so the county judge holds that book and does not share that book. So that's why I say it needs to go to Commissioner's Court and the county clerk. That way, if Tim Andrews comes to Kevin and says, hey, I heard about the strategy that's being held over here, then I will know about it. I will let him inform Tim about it. At least the communication can be there. But if I didn't know about it, and if he doesn't, and no one attends these meetings, or no one gets online to look at Regional, then you can't educate yourself. So what we try to do is we try to help educate the people we work for, and this would help in this strategy. Okay, but that's county government in a nutshell, in a way.
Well, the other
Not all counties. I'm just saying some.
The other thing is, if you rely on just the Regional poundage to be the notice, that only comes out every 5 years. That isn't very often compared to strategies that pop up or projects that pop up. So I think this was an important thing, at least for Hays County, where I'm from, because of various wells that popped up suddenly, well fields in areas that did not have groundwater districts. And it took a while for everybody to catch on what was going on.
Which all of this is different from.
Yeah, we're removing.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, your section, I think we've got consensus that your section that you've asked to be removed is removed. I don't think there's any objection to that. But it's now open to this other issue about notice to Commissioner's Court in general about water management strategies.
Just make certain they're notified.
Okay, well, why don't we do this? I think we get the gist of what everyone is there any objection, maybe I should say, is there any objection in this room for us trying to come up with some sort of strategy of communication that county commissioners, judge and commissioners court are made aware formally of strategies that are planned for their county that are in the regional water plan? Does anyone have any objection to that concept? Okay. We will work to figure out how exactly we can make that it would really be under the guise of rules.
Could it be
I
like
guess
guiding
a change in rules, right? If it was a notification requirement?
Would it be like under guiding principles? I mean, one of the things that we do as the guiding principles for the entities here is to do that.
We could do that informally as Regional ourselves.
Yes.
Yeah.
We don't need direction from the Water Development Board to do that. So that's what you're suggesting. If we say we would, that this would be something that we would be willing to add to our guiding principles to add a communication requirement. Would we rather do that than put it as a recommendation in Chapter 8? Just to say it would be something that we could consider as a notification requirement for this Regional?
Me personally, I'd rather have it in Chapter 8.
But statewide?
Yes.
Okay.
Because there are a lot of counties that don't have the staff to be able to track it, and they do not have a water district, and they really do, truthfully do need to know on these water plans.
Okay, so I think the direction I'm getting here is we'll work with Elizabeth at the Water Development Board to see, first of all, what the requirement is for notification. If it's simply just a public notice of the meeting, maybe we could see if there would be a recommendation to extend that notice to include at least a list of projects that are proposed for that county. And at least that would give the Commissioners Court of that county some notification that these projects could be planned in their county. Now, I think if we're trying to dictate as they're implemented, when that actual notice takes place, that's a lot more complicated. Are you starting it when they begin their engineering, or when they start drilling, or when they go to construction? I mean, when does that notice happen? And that's a little bit more complicated. So at least we could have on the list of the projects that are planned for their counties, and that they could then reach out to those respective sponsors of those projects
Or
and
keep
say,
track of it, or
please
come to
keep
the
me
meetings.
informed. I would like to know about this particular project. They would at least know it's on the horizon at that point.
Suzanne, that's why I think it's a good idea what you mentioned, is to have a separate working group to resolve all those issues, look at all those issues, including the county where the project or strategy is going to be, or the exporting county. So now you have two counties.
That's
Should
true.
both be notified.
Yeah. Yeah, this is more than,
Just notify.
okay.
Well, with pipeline routes, I mean, it might be more than 2 counties.
It's gonna need some work to develop this. So we're not necessarily saying we're gonna do that for this plan. These are recommendations for the future, but we could come up with some sort of communication, sharing the projects and the plans somehow. We'll come up with some language. It would have to be developed after this cycle, because we don't have all that detail right now. Okay.
I guess I would
more
make
thing.
one comment in relation to, the thought of including that in guiding principles. I mean, we've been very careful to prevent ourselves getting into a regulatory mode in terms of the purpose of this group.
Yeah, I agree.
And if we take on that kind of our guiding principles saying that entities should provide that notice, we're, I think, getting close to crossing that line into regulating, how projects are basically carried out once they're approved in the plan. And I think we just need to be careful about that barrier.
And I would hope that conversation, those comments were part of the conversation that this planning group are going to have.
Yeah, and that's very well said, because that's something that I've always tried to do. We don't want to overstep, because this is not what we're here for.
Right.
But this is just a recommendation, recommendation for the entire state to do, and because make them aware that it's an issue.
I don't disagree with that. I just don't think we're the people to do that. That's what the state agencies are doing.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I think it would probably be something that we could recommend in kind of the planning rules, that there's notification during this process, that people know that there's projects in the plan for their county.
For purposes of Chapter 8, one option could be we could either table this for Chapter 8, or we could include another recommendation that would be for Region L to explore the issues associated with notices of water management strategies and potential remedies for that. So then that would be incorporated in a guiding principle in the future for the 2026 Regional Water Plan. It doesn't necessarily have to be a legislative recommendation or a recommendation to everybody in the state right now, but you could put another recommendation of let's Region L explore this.
To come up with potential recommendations that could either be for our region or statewide.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
That's an option.
We could do that too. All right, so we'll come up with some strategy. Either it's going to be part of Chapter 8, or it will be this other strategy that maybe this group will look at it and come up with some recommendations that could then be explored statewide later. We could kind of, if we hash through it, maybe that will be helpful in helping everybody else know about that. Okay. All right.
Is that all the comments for Chapter 8?
Yes.
One more?
Yeah. We're done.
So we're moving on to Chapter 5. This is a presentation of the tables in Chapter 5. We do ask for some RWPG direction in here, but there isn't necessarily anything that needs to be approved per se. So as part of Chapter 5, we've already identified potentially feasible water management strategies. We've evaluated those water management strategies. We've worked on allocating the water management strategy supplies. And now we're looking to make sure that all of the WUGs, and municipal WUGs in particular, have enough supply to meet their needs throughout the planning horizon. So this presentation is aimed at, we'll cover definitions and terminology. We're also going to include example water supply plans for water user groups with needs. And there's a handout, and we'll go through an example of how to actually navigate that handout. It's pretty hefty. And then we'll have an example water supply plan for wholesale water providers. And there's another handout specifically for wholesale water providers, and we'll go through that. There's a lot of math involved in all of this, but it's basic arithmetic. It's adding and subtracting. So just to recap what a need is. So a need is a potential water supply shortage based on the difference between water demands and water supplies. These needs can be met or addressed by water management strategies. So just briefly, you've got your supplies, subtract your demands, and that gives you either a supply or surplus, if it's a positive number, or a need, if it's a negative number. And again, if we've got a need, an identified need, then those are addressed by water management strategies. And so in the regional water planning process, we established the supply projections in Chapter 3, the demand projections and population in Chapter 2, and then we identified the surpluses and identified needs in Chapter 4. So now this iterative process happens where we then apply water management strategy supply volumes and then determine whether or not there are any shortages. So for purposes of this discussion, shortages in this context means a negative number when water management strategy supplies are factored in, and shortages when left unresolved would lead to, quote, unmet needs. And unmet needs are undesirable. And so again, supplies from Chapter 3, demands from Chapter 2, water management strategy supplies from Chapter 5, so that's all those water management strategies and their volumes, and once we add those in, do we still have shortages? So these are all the identified and evaluated water management strategies in the 2021 Regional Water Plan. I will come back to these. This is just to show you all the different water management strategy supplies that we have applied to this basic math to figure out if there are shortages.
Just a quick question on the list. I know that there was some effort to identify some smaller projects, and I'm looking down at 30, 31. I don't see Springs Hill Water Supply Corporation. I thought we had a water plant expansion. So I'm just wondering why that isn't necessarily on the list.
Probably in number 8, facility.
Good point.
Okay, and that's where it's included. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, and we'll go over all of these water management strategies, and like I mentioned to Diane earlier, there are several water management strategies, 1 through 9, that are general. There's not necessarily like a particular sponsor. It's a general water management strategy that has many WUGs or associated with it. So a little bit more terminology here. So the South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group has a guiding principle, number 8. And the goal is to develop enough water management strategy supplies to satisfy all the identified projected needs during the planning horizon, so 2020 to 2070. That's a guiding principle. In instances where those needs cannot be met, a justification and explanation for why those needs cannot be met must be included in the plan. And so if there are needs or shortages that are left unresolved, then those needs or shortages would become an unmet need, And an unmet need is defined as the portion of an identified water need that is not met by recommended water management strategies. So with all of that in mind, we will apply these concepts to our water user groups. We've developed a handout, it says 5.3 tables on it, that shows each county with a summary of identified needs, so from chapter 4. And then for those water user groups with needs, we have identified water management strategies that would satisfy those needs. So therefore, identifying ways so that we don't have unmet needs here. So the following slides provide examples of how to navigate that handout. So the first one is Bexar County. So there are 2 slides for Bexar County that show all of the WUGs within Bexar County. If there's a wholesale water provider in Bexar County, for example, SAWS, just the water user group supplies, demands are included here. This doesn't include all of the entities that SAWS sells to. And so this is just showing that this is the data that we've all seen previously. This is from chapter 4. So this is just that simple calculation of supply minus demand, identified needs from the Texas Water Development Board. And so if you were looking at your handout and you scrolled to Bexar County in your handout and you said, hey, I'm going to look at Fair Oaks because they've got projected needs, then you would go down to the table regarding Fair Oaks Ranch. There would not be, for example, a table for East Central SUD since there are no projected needs during the planning horizon for them. So we don't need a water management supply plan for them because all of their needs are met as is. So for Fair Oaks Ranch, there are needs, so we would go to this table, and this is the recommended water supply plan for Fair Oaks Ranch. And you can see that in 2040, they have a negative number, so they have needs starting in 2040 through 2070. And there are 2 water management strategies that have been identified for this WUG. The first is advanced water conservation, which is one of those general strategies where you apply a % conservation and then identify the volumes associated with that. That was an advanced water conservation tool that the Texas Water Development Board provided us. And then there's the recycled water strategy for Fair Oaks Ranch. So Fair Oaks Ranch is planning a 0.6 MGD wastewater treatment plant that would provide reuse water. And their plan is to use 100% of their reuse water. And so 0.6 MGD converts to 672 acre feet. And so that is planning to go online in 2028. So that's why it's included in the 2030 decade. And so with these 2 water management strategies, the total new supplies are shown here. So that's just the sum of all the water management strategy supplies. And then after applying these, so 351 plus 117 is 468. So that's the projected new management supplies. And so you can see here, there are no unmet needs for Fair Oaks Ranch. So we've done this for all of the water user groups. We've done it for, what was it, over 200 WUGs. And of the 200 WUGs, we've identified 21 that still show shortages that I'll get to in a minute. Here's another example for Victoria County. So if you're interested in Victoria County, you scroll to the Victoria County summary. There are no negative numbers for Quail Creek mud, so they don't have a water management supply plan. But Victoria does show needs in 2020 through 2070. So the water management supply plan is listed here. There are 4 water management strategies that are identified for Victoria, the city of Victoria. And with these new supplies, then there are no unmet needs. Does that make sense? Are there any questions about all of that? So, after doing this for all those WUGs, there are 21 that have been identified as having shortages. And we have identified potential resolutions for them. We've reached out to each of the providers for these water, for supplying water. So And 1 through 10 is mainly, WUGs 1 through 10 are mainly purchasing water from a wholesale water provider. So we've reached out to SAWS to see if they would be willing to sell water to each of these entities, and they've indicated that they are. Our next step is to reach out to each of these entities, and we've already reached out to a few of them, to make sure that this potential resolution is agreeable to them. So that's our next steps, and we will present this at the February meeting. And this is the second slide showing the WUGs that still have needs.
When you reach out to these groups, do you explain that this does not mean that's going to happen unless they go and talk with that entity?
Yes, ma'am.
Some of the small rural water supplies are very naive,
Yes, we do.
at least the ones I've dealt with.
And we make sure to mention that, this is just for purposes of the plan. So,
As far as those with Canyon Regional, we had a meeting yesterday, and they're all agreed to what we.
perfect. Thank you very much. All right. So those were all the municipal WUGs. These are the non-municipal WUGs that show needs or shortages still. Of these, we have potential resolutions for rows 11 and 12, so manufacturing in Comal and Guadalupe counties. We've reached out to GVRA, and they've indicated that they are agreeable to selling this water to them. So that means that this is a potential resolution that we can actually resolve this. So those two can fall off of this list. However, for the first 10 WUGs, there are irrigation shortages for 10 counties. And for reference, in the 2016 Regional Water Plan, there were 10 irrigation WUGs with unmet needs of up to 115,000 acre-feet per year. And for mining, in 2016, there were 3 mining WUGs, and so there are 2 now. And so we need to identify potential resolutions for these, or identify these as having unmet needs. So in the 2016 plan, there were irrigation and mining unmet needs. So we would like your direction and on how to proceed with this. If it would be okay to leave these irrigation WUGs as having unmet needs, irrigation and mining WUGs as having unmet needs.
Is there a stakeholder from Frio County that can explain 0 irrigation needs today, ramping up drastically to 7,000 by 2070?
It makes no sense.
And you got that information from where? From
This is, so the supply and the demand information was established and approved by the RWPG and approved by the Texas Water Development Board, and these are identified needs by the Texas Water Development Board. And essentially, we don't have water management strategies of sufficient supply to meet these needs currently in the plan, draft plan.
I do. In the case of Calhoun County, and maybe the others, if you look, for example, table 5.3-31, it does recommend a plan irrigation water conservation, and then it doesn't calculate any sort of yield due to uncertainty in general, I suppose. So is it the case, well, it remains an unmet need because we can't calculate the yield. It's not as though we don't have a strategy intended to address it. So there's a way, would it be acceptable to essentially comment that we have a strategy that may help address the issue, maybe completely, but due to uncertainty, we can't calculate it.
That's right, we can.
This is also based upon the worst year of the period of record. So during good years, there is water there. This is just based upon the worst year in the last 7 years. Does that make sense?
You're saying the need arises because it's calculated based on worst case conditions.
That's right.
Right.
Well,
I understand.
For irrigation.
Well, let me ask Tommy, I know we have a program in place through the HCP, the FISBO. Are those calculations considered, that there are so many farmers who are going to curtail planting during certain years or not going to use water during certain years? Is that considered a water conservation practice?
So this assumes full implementation of the Edwards Aquifer HCP,
Well,
which includes all of those voluntary
okay.
curtailments. Yes, sir.
Being from Frio County, my question is, now where did these numbers originally come from?
So, the supply numbers were developed by the Texas Water Development Board for available to irrigators, and then the demands were also developed by the Texas Water Development Board. And so these needs are identified as a result of data that was obtained from the Texas Water Development Board.
Okay.
Lauren, I just looked at DeWitt, just as another county, and the table that you gave us doesn't show that in 2050, 2060, 2070, they actually gained, it stopped in this table, the big packet table stops at 2040. I know, but wouldn't that be, this just is needs? Okay. Okay, so you don't show, well, here they show it. I was just curious, the table on page 5.3.18-18. Maybe it's just, do you see what I'm saying?
I haven't gotten there yet. I'm
Okay.
sorry. 5.3.18, so for Selma?
DeWitt?
It's on table 5.
Oh, okay, you're looking at page 5.3.18. Okay, so for
I'm on
DeWitt,
page 5.3-18.
and at the irrigation for DeWitt?
Yeah, I'm just comparing this, I'm just trying to understand, I guess, the difference. The 5.3-43 is irrigation for DeWitt, and it has the 266 negative, the 247 negative, the 61 negative, and then when you're moving into 50, 60, 2050, 60, and 70, it doesn't reflect.
I think that that's a typo, because in some instances when we're showing needs, we'll go through and we'll just delete surpluses, and I think that this is just one of a typo that we'll correct.
Okay, because I know you have the surpluses on the one right below it for manufacturing. I know it's not a lot, but the positives are shown. I'm just curious, so ultimately these will all match up.
Yes, ma'am. And again, all of these, like I said, we're still working through and identifying these potential resolutions and applying the potential resolutions for the ultimate goal of no municipal unmet needs. And so this is a draft. We're going to continue working through the draft, and then we'll make this available to everybody on the website, and it will be adopted as part of the IPP in February.
So I think the direction you need from us, though, is are we, just as we did in 2016, are we willing to move forward with a plan that has unmet irrigation and mining needs? Otherwise, we're going to need some fast and furious resolutions that people are going to have to help us with.
Well, I have a question. If we can recommend water conservation to municipalities as a strategy, can we recommend water conservation to irrigation as a strategy?
We can, and I think many of these already have water conservation identified.
I think it's identified, it's just can't be quantified.
Is it not quantified by the drought management tool, or sorry, advanced water conservation tool?
No, irrigation is not.
Okay.
So I think it's identified as a strategy, just not quantified as a volume. So we can't do the math, I think, is the issue.
But
Is that, am I understanding that right? I'm sorry?
If we left the need there, as we did in the last plan, we could say that water conservation could be applied, but it is not known the exact amount.
Yes, ma'am, absolutely.
And that's basically what these tables show, I think, in the big packet. It shows recommended plan is irrigation water conservation for all of them, I believe, but there's just no numbers available.
Okay, you're right.
So I guess, Adam, I was going to thank you for opening your mouth because I was going to ask you, what would your suggestion be relative to this irrigation need being left as such?
It's unfortunate that this is again a unmet need, but we've discussed many varied reasons for that, and I don't think there's any way at this point that we could come up with anything miraculous that would solve some of those particular large needs. So I would say follow along with the same thing we did in 2016 and recognize that we have irrigation water conservation as a recommended strategy for all these.
Okay. Any objections to that at this point? All right, it seems like you have consensus to move forward with what was stated here, that we would recognize the need and promote conservation as a strategy.
Thank you.
Yeah, Tim is asking about the steam electric. Would we do the same on that one? That's a Bear County need. I don't know, is that something, I don't know if SAWS is aware of that, or are you?
Lauren, who is is it CPS that has the need?
It's just the general category of steam electric power. It's the general WUG for Bexar County of steam electric power. And so this is one where SAWS could potentially sell them water. I just haven't reached out to SAWS yet to ask them about this. But if there are any other entities that might be willing to sell the water, we'd be happy to add them as a potential resolution.
So I guess put us down for that, and then we can have that discussion.
Sure. That would be wonderful. Thank you.
Victoria County is the same way.
GBRA solved that.
Yeah, there's a strategy.
GBRA. This was a new one. I wasn't aware of this shortage. In 16, we didn't have this shortage, and this is really was the first time that I've even known there was a shortage in Bexar County, and I figured that SAWS would pick that up now. But GBRA, well, we already knew in Victoria we had a shortage for steam electric power, and GBRA picked that up early last meeting.
Right. So there was an identified need for Victoria steam electric. And GBRA was the sponsor for the Victoria Steam Electric Power Water Management Strategy. And then the water management strategy allocation is greater than the need. And so there are no shortages or any unmet needs identified for Victoria County Steam Electric.
Okay, so we will, I guess y'all will look into that.
Yep.
Thank you. Moving on to Chapter 5.4 tables. This isn't necessarily a big deal. We do want to get with each of these wholesale water providers to make sure that we are accurately reflecting everything. Again, this is just an example, and we've used GBRA as the example, and GBRA is, as many of you know, it's a complex system. And so we're definitely welcome to information to correct this if there's information that is missing or clarifications that are necessary. So one of the things that has been done in the past for wholesale water providers is water management supply plan has been developed. And so because GBRA is a water user group and a wholesale water provider, they have different demands and different supplies associated with each. And so in this top group, we've got the WUG demands, which is relatively low for, considering GBRA's large supply and demands just in general. But demands, supplies, And then there are no needs associated with the water user group GBRA. And then on a wholesale basis, they sell water to a variety of entities, and their demands are wrapped up in a way under GBRA, and those are reflected here in the contract demands row. And then contract supplies, and then again, supplies minus demands gives you either a positive number or a negative number. Positive indicates it's a supply. So we've got 5,000 acre feet thereabouts for the planning horizon in terms of supply, management supply for GBRA. And then applying all of the different water management strategies that are associated with GBRA. So we've got advanced water conservation, the ARWA GBRA project phase 1, the GBRA mid-basin project phase 2, the GBRA lower basin storage, the GBRA lower basin new appropriation, and as we were talking about earlier, the GBRA Victoria County Steam Electric. Now, it's worth pointing out that the GBRA Victoria County Steam Electric project, while 23,925 acre feet are going toward steam electric to meet that need, this is not an additional 23,925 acre feet. It's actually coming out of the lower basin new appropriation water management strategy, which is 40,500. So the sum of all of these rows is 142,280 acre feet. So not the Victoria County Steam Electric is not included in that sum. And so I had to split this out on 2 slides. That's a lot of information. And so kind of carrying forward, the total new supplies from all of those water management strategies is 142 acre feet in 2020. And so the 142,000 acre feet plus the 5,000 acre feet gives you the 147,000 acre feet for the projected system water and water management strategy supplies. And then all of these water management strategy supplies are then allocated to various purchasers. So we already know that, for example, Go Forth Sud is planning to purchase 4,000 acre feet per year from GBRA as part of, I think, the ARWA GBRA phase 1 project. And so that's reflected here. And so all of these water management strategy purchases are then summed in this dark blue line right here for total water management strategy purchases. And so that leaves GBRA with a total system supply of about 87,000 acre feet in 2020. The purpose of this is just to walk you through all the different steps that we've taken so that we can present the wholesale water provider water supply plans. And we'll reach out to each of the wholesale water providers to make sure that this information is accurate.
Anybody have any questions?
The 87,990 in 2020 is what they have available to sell the non-wholesale purchase. All right?
They could, yes.
Or new wholesale.
Or new wholesale purchase.
Can I ask a question on a specific point? In the big book here, we've got Hayes County meeting a need for Wimberley Water Supply Corporation. Its entire 2070 need is being met by local groundwater. In the last slide you just showed, there's a GBRA application for that same water supply corporation. Would they choose, or are we double counting? I'm having trouble understanding how we can appropriate 2 sets of waters for one need. Wimberley WSC on the bottom, you have it highlighted, 2875 by 2070. To meet the need for 2070 for the Wimberley Valley, for the Wimberley Water Supply Corporation. And on page 5328, at the bottom, you've got a different need, 2960, being met by local groundwater. I just need to understand.
It's an issue that we're still working through, and I'm going to ask Katie to come over here and explain the steps that we're planning to take here to address this.
So originally, Wimberley WSC's
is going to be met by local groundwater. There's not groundwater available in the MAG for that.
Nope.
And so GBRA is going to meet that need instead, so it should not show up as Wimberley getting their need met by local groundwater.
Great answer. Thank you. And just so I know, when we're talking about these numbers in Region L for Hays County, which is split between K and L, are we talking about the entire portion of Hays County for these purposes, or are we only talking about Region L in this room?
We're only talking about portions of the partial Hays County.
Okay. Thank you very much.
And by the way, one of the things about this regional water planning process is that we coordinate closely with Region K, with the consultants with Region K, to make sure that all of our different projects are lining up correctly.
Thank you.
If I could maybe address some of our excesses, waters that are available, may be down in the lower basin, so they may not be available to others. Was that your point? That there is an excess?
I just wondered how we were going to fulfill the same need, or are we just very fortunate to have two separate water sources that can fulfill that's very same need.
So that what I guess.
And we don't have groundwater, so you guys are looking pretty good. Yeah.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
So you previously stated that there were some unmet needs for various entities, and that you believe they could be met by either SAWS or GBRA, and you went to SAWS and you went to GBRA and asked them, would you be willing to sell water to these folks to meet their needs?
Yes, sir. And CRWA as well.
Okay, and CRWA also. When you talk to those providers, do you also ask them to assert that, yes, we have sufficient supplies to meet all of these people's needs if they all ask at the same time?
Yes. So as part of that, we're providing this information, and we're not, yes, we're making sure that they do.
Okay.
Are there any other questions on Chapter 5? Okay. And again, this is a draft, and we will represent this in February. And if you're ready, we can move on to the next agenda item.
We are moving on to item number 12. Is that correct? Is that what you're
Yes,
talking
ma'am.
about? Okay, so this is discussion and appropriate action regarding selected, recommended, or alternative water management strategies. I just want to do a quick time check, though, just to make sure, because I know it's 1:45 p.m. These last few items, can you give me an estimate on time to go through these?
I don't think it would take more than 30 minutes to go through them, unless there are a lot of questions.
So unless there's objection, we're going to work through this to finish up.
Just to complicate things, Suzanne, January 1st was the time that we got a new caterer in our cafeteria. So I don't know if you want to put that into the mix, but it's a local company called True Flavors.
Oh.
If you're familiar.
Yes.
So even if we go through, y'all may want to visit.
That's very nice. I didn't realize that they were there. That's terrific.
I heard
So in
that
other
too.
words, even if we finish, you may want to take your lunch here because that's an excellent caterer. So, all right, so let's push through. So item number 12.
All right, so I'm just going to open up this snapshot for you. This is should be a familiar document. We've been presenting it for, I think, the last 3 meetings. And so this just shows a summary of all of the water management strategies that have been identified and evaluated. It includes the month that each water management strategy was presented to the RWPG. It also includes firm yield in the final decade for each one of these. For the general strategies at the top, the 1 through 9, in some cases it's not possible to identify the final decade firm yields, so we put in A. In other instances, we have summed it for all of the water management, for all the WUGs that are associated with these general strategies. And the costs for them are average. We have these footnotes here that explain that. And then we have the environmental and cultural assessment ratings that were developed as part of the water management strategy evaluations that we presented previously. So this is just a good reference and summary slide for you all to look at and enjoy. I have taken that snapshot and I've put it into this presentation as a talking point. So, one of the major goals of today's meeting is to identify recommended and, if necessary, alternative water management strategies. We will use this designation or this identification by the RWPG to then plug into our cumulative effects analysis, which I will discuss in the next agenda item. So just to recap where we've been. So the general planning process is to identify the supplies, identify demands based on population, and then we compare to identify surpluses and needs. And then we identify water management strategies to meet those needs, and we evaluate them, and then we're in this final step where you recommend them. So we've done all of these things at this point, and this is where we will need your direction. So the Texas Water Development Board requires RWPGs to identify the recommended water management strategies and alternative water management strategies. The South Central Texas Regional Water Planning Group also has a guiding principle regarding recommended water management strategies, which is summarized here. And the guiding principle requests that the sponsors for each water management strategy self-identify whether or not they are recommended or alternative. The RWPG would then designate recommended or alternative water management strategies using a consensus approach while respecting the strategy sponsor's wishes. And so in general, the recommended water management strategies are self-identified or identified by you all using a consensus approach while respecting the strategy sponsor's wishes. An alternative water management strategy would be identified, self-identified by the sponsor as this will be alternative. It would be also identified using a consensus approach. And an alternative water management strategy might arise if a water management strategy results in over-allocation or exceedance of the MAG. An alternative could also be identified if there are multiple water management strategies that would be mutually exclusive. So in the previous plan, for example, to pick on GBRA, there were 3 or 4 different options using, kind of tapping into the same supply source, and only one would actually be feasible to implement. So the others were identified as alternative. In the 2021 plan, we have no instances where there are water management strategies that are mutually exclusive. And so this is just the snapshot again to summarize the 3 slides of water management strategies that have been identified and evaluated. They have all been self-reported or self-identified by sponsors to be recommended. And so I ask of you all direction to identify recommended water management strategies and, if necessary, identify alternative water management strategies.
And do you have any that, it said something about if water management strategy results in an over-allocation or exceedance of modeled available groundwater?
We did have 2 instances that did result in an over-allocation or exceedance of the MAG, which is not allowed. And so we reduced the firm yield to be able for the projects to both fit into the MAG. And those 2 projects are the Maxwell WSC Trinity Well, which is number 31, and the County Line Sud Trinity Well Field, which is number 32. So we decreased both of them proportionately. I think County Lines was 1,000 acre feet, and Maxwell's was
360 before.
360.
And both of those entities have no needs, even if these projects were not recommended. Both entities have a surplus through the on the planning horizon.
What are the
Yeah.
Good question. So the purple colors are basically a gradient to identify which ones are largest. So for the final decade firm yield, the darker pink color means that it has a greater firm yield. And then it's a gradient from dark pink to white. And so the lighter in color means the less firm yield. So you can just really quickly glance and figure out which one's greater. And then it's same with the annual unit cost. Yes, sir.
Is there a way we could put irrigation groundwater conservation in this list, even though there is no sponsor? Do you have some which have no available firm yield?
It would require us to identify that as a water management strategy, and I believe back in 2017, there were sort of guidelines on how we would identify those potentially feasible water management strategies and when we could sort of giving a cutoff of when we would have to stop, because we have a finite amount of time. That would require a whole evaluation. If that were something that the group was interested in, we could potentially do an amendment to add that as a water management strategy. But I don't think it could be included just straight out at this point. Yes, sir.
I'm delay that lunch date. So back to those tables we were discussing in 5 point whatever, et cetera. You know, we identified irrigation water conservation, again, no yield. Help me understand, these charts, are they, when they list I think you refer to them as a plan, are these water management strategies as well, or is a plan different than a strategy now?
Okay, so a water supply plan is a listing of all the different water management strategies that could be used to meet needs. And so a given user might, like a given WUG might have multiple of these water management strategies to satisfy their needs or to add to their supplies.
So it can be listed without being analyzed.
All of these water management strategies have been evaluated.
Well, I think his point is it's listed as as a strategy without a yield in your tables, as though it had been analyzed.
Yeah, I'm going to defer to Sarah on that
I
procedure.
also have a question. Is this table intended to be anywhere in the plan, or is this just a reference for the process? Okay.
That's right.
So if this is just a reference for the meeting to sort of draw your attention, I think that all of those strategies are listed in the tables and will be included in the plan. As Lauren mentioned, if it has zero yield, it might not, I think there's that distinction between a water management strategy and a project. So I think it doesn't make the cutoff for a project because it has zero yield, but it is a recommended strategy because there's not, costs associated with it that would be evaluated separately, but it is discussed and recommended as a strategy. So, sorry, I think it could be included in here. And to clarify, those strategies, whatever it is, my glasses are down, 5 through 8, that don't have a yield shown, that's not because they don't produce a yield, it's just that it's a different yield for every one of the WUGs that's receiving that water, so it's not a very useful number for us to put up there as like an average or a sum of all of the different subsets of that. So all of those are coming with a firm yield in order to be a strategy that's evaluated in an associated project. They're just not shown here because I think representing them in aggregate is sort of more confusing than helpful.
So will there be a narrative that explains agricultural irrigation as a strategy? Or conservation, I'm sorry. Yes, thank you.
Absolutely.
There's a narrative on that.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Would that be okay, Adam? Okay.
And we can also send that to you for review specifically to make sure that it's accurate.
That would be helpful.
Okay, great.
I'd like to recommend that these water management strategies 1 through 33 be recommended as they show meeting the needs for the region. Except for the region.
So you're putting a recommendation on the table that we
recommend
take the
1 through
the
33.
self-identified recommended strategies as presented here?
Correct.
Okay,
To be designated as recommended strategies.
Recommended strategies.
yes.
Plus any in the tables.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so it states that we're going to do this by consensus rather than action, because this would be incorporated in the plan, and then it would be adopted by an action at that time. So consensus, does anyone have any concerns with that recommendation regarding the using all of these as recommended strategies? Any concerns? Okay, not hearing any concern, then we will move forward with that recommendation.
Thank you. And if it's all right with you, we can move on to the final agenda item that I am presenting on Chapter 6.
Now, Lauren, I know we talked about this at the staff work group, and maybe I'm just, maybe this is what you're going to talk about next before we move into that. But I know we had a discussion about management supply and doing the math and figuring out, okay, because again, that's one of the issues that has come up in the past. What did we finally determine about talking about ultimately the balance between any kind of quote surplus or management supply that would be at the end?
Sure. So the Texas Water Development Board has a formula that they have developed and stipulate that would determine the management supply. And management supply would end up being developed by the DB22 database. And then it would be included as a report, the DB22 report, in the regional water plan. So it would be available for everyone to review.
Okay, so that will be in the initially prepared plan or at the end?
It will be in the initially prepared plan.
Is that something that we would be able to see in February or before the adoption?
So it would be difficult. We could try. Sarah?
So what we tend to discuss in the meetings and what people who are so involved are really focused on is the narrative in that hard copy version, and I'm sure that Lauren and Elizabeth have both discussed this before, but all of this data is also being entered into this online database. And I think in reference to the earlier comment, would there ever be an overallocation of somebody's supply? None of that is allowed in the database. So we're following every single drop of water from source availability through the supply to a wholesale water provider to the end user, and each of those is accounted for in the database. So the effort of putting all of these decisions that we've made through the planning process into the database is something that we typically sort of reserve for the time between the finalization of the plan and when it's actually due. And all of those reports come from the database, so we may not have those in time for the February meeting, but it will certainly be included in the IPP as an appendix, which is as required by the Water Development Board.
And again, it's worth noting that after the IPP is adopted, there will be a lengthy comment period, public comment period, where if there are any additions, clarifications, revisions, we can make those.
Okay, I know that in the past, again, things have changed, but that was kind of came up as a surprise during the public meeting process. Someone would say, well, how much more supply do you have in need? And then there was like a big number at the time. And it kind of surprised some of the members of the planning group to learn about that as we were going through the public process. Now, we obviously have a good response to that there may be more projects identified than need, because every project may not necessarily materialize. There needs to be some flexibility on the part of those water user groups to make sure that as some projects may materialize and some won't. I mean, there's a good explanation to that, but the number to know what we're talking about, and then the explanation of why that is the case. I just want to make sure that we're cognizant of that, because that is something that has come up during the public review process that I don't want this group to be surprised by. So I don't know if the calculation, because it's probably going to be asked at some point, so you may want to have that calculation handy as we go through the process. but it would be nice for us to know it before that happens. So if there's some way, even if it's a rough calculation, it may not be down to the exact formula, but as you're looking at the needs versus supplies, and you have all the information, it just may not be within the calculation of the formula. At least it could give us an order of magnitude. Are we talking 3 times? Are we talking 2 times? Are we talking 7 times? I mean, it would be nice to know the order of magnitude.
We can certainly do that if you'd like for us to put that in some sort of document, or
just maybe we can talk about it in February, just to make sure everybody understands. Do y'all remember, I mean, those of us that have been involved in this for a long time, remember that. So it would just be the order of magnitude would be important. The down to the actual acre foot may not be necessary, but it's the order of magnitude I think would be important for us to know.
Okay.
Okay? Is that fair? All right. Thank you.
Moving on to the Chapter 6 approach. So the purpose of this presentation today is really just to provide an overview of the approach for performing the cumulative effect analysis, which is included in part in Chapter 6. And so Chapter 6 is entitled Impacts of the Regional Water Plan and Consistency with the Protection of Water Resources, Agricultural Resources, and Natural Resources. The Texas Water Development Board rules require the following sections to be, or following evaluations to be included in Chapter 6. So description of the impacts to natural resources, to key water quality parameters, to the voluntary redistribution of water from rural and agricultural areas, the socioeconomic impacts of not meeting projected water needs, and navigation. Chapter 6 must also include a summary of any unmet needs and an explanation as to why they are unmet, and also includes a description of the consistency with long-term protection of resources, the consistency of the plan. And so all of these different requirements kind of all boil down to this cumulative effects analysis that we do for the regional water plan implementation. And so this is the cumulative effects. It's the cumulative effects of implementing the recommended water management strategies fully in 2070 that are then quantified through long-term simulation of natural hydrologic processes as they are affected by human influences. So the hydrologic assumptions for performing the cumulative effects analysis and also for determining supplies in Chapter 3 were established and approved by the RWPG and the Texas Water Development Board in November of 2017. And that includes, for surface water, the baseline for consideration of effects on flows includes full implementation of the Edwards Aquifer HCP, full utilization of existing water rights, and no effluent discharges unless specifically required in a contract. And so that is the key difference between the 2016 plan and the 2021 plan. The 2016 plan did incorporate reuse or effluent discharges. For groundwater, cumulative effects of the plan implementation for the Edwards Aquifer are based on full implementation of the EAHCP, and for the Carrizo, Wilcox, Gulf Coast, and Trinity aquifers are based on the simulated impacts of full implementation of the MAGS, modeled available groundwater, within each groundwater management area. And this is a smattering of the models that we're using for the cumulative effects analysis. So this figure illustrates the processes involved with performing the cumulative effects analysis. It also illustrates the connectivity of the various groundwater and surface water models, as well as water management strategies for the 2021 plan. So the overall process is to simulate the full implementation of the recommended water management strategies, groundwater water management strategies, and surface water management strategies. Determine the effects of the groundwater water management strategies on groundwater and how that might affect drawdown, which then can impact stream flow. And that would be evaluated by the WAMs. And so the overall goal is to determine the effects on in-stream flow and estuarine inflow. So the potential cumulative effects of implementation of the 2021 South Central Texas Regional Water Plan on in-stream flows and freshwater inflows to bays and estuaries will be assessed for 7 strategic locations in the Guadalupe-San Antonio River Basin. Cumulative effects for stream and estuary locations in the Nueces River Basin are not going to be assessed because there are no recommended water management strategies in the plan that are expected to significantly affect the flows in the Nueces River Basin or freshwater inflows to the Nueces estuary. And this is consistent with what was performed in the 2016 cumulative effects analysis. Oops. So for each of these strategic locations, we'll have 2 graphics. And so this is just an example from the 2016 plan. We have not been able to perform this analysis yet because we needed to get your buy-in, your direction on which strategies were recommended. And so this is the median monthly inflow under baseline scenarios, so the white bars in the left graphic. And then also with full implementation of the Regional Water Plan in 2070, which is the black bars in this graphic. So for example, in April, the baseline is 60,000 acre-feet per year. And with the full implementation of the plan in 2070, it's decreased to 50,000 acre-feet per year. So this is the baseline inflow change, median stream flow change. And then we'll determine the inflow for every month of the simulations and then rank them from high to low. So then you can see the flow, how the flows will change with and without the plan. So in this instance, this light gray bar or light gray line is the baseline. And then with full implementation of the Regional Water Plan water management strategies in 2070, this is the black line. So in this instance, stream flows are expected to decrease between the 15th and 85th percentiles due to recommended water management strategies, but overall aren't significantly changed. So this is just an example of what the outputs will be. We don't really have to get in a whole lot of detail about it, but this is the planned approach and this is the planned output. And then we will take this information, the changes to stream flow, and provide it to SWCA, our environmental consultant, and they will perform environmental assessments. And they will be mainly looking at the environmental effects and perform environmental assessments to look at the impacts of endangered, threatened, and species of concern, vegetation and wildlife habitat, water quality and aquatic habitats, cultural resources. There will also be sections in the environmental assessment about climate variability. That is a result of the guiding principles with regards to this cumulative effects analysis. SWCA will also evaluate the impacts on key water quality parameters. So these are the water quality parameters that are most likely to be impacted. So chloride, sulfates, TDS, DO, pH, bacteria, temperature, and nitrates. And the impacts to key water quality parameters will be compared to current conditions using best available data. And that is the approach for Chapter 6.
I have a question.
Yes, sir.
On page 2, slide number 4, under groundwater, it says reliability of existing groundwater permits and availability to new groundwater consistent with MAG estimates. Is that the assumption that all permits are exercised fully? Is that what you're saying as compared to the MAG?
Yes.
That's what you're saying here?
Yes, sir.
And all of these hydrologic assumptions in the model runs, in addition to full exercise of existing surface water rights and zero effluent discharges of the surface site, is it also placed against the drought of record.
Yes.
Is that one of the inputs as well?
Yes.
I might put that in this to sort of make it a little more clear and specific.
Okay, it'll be, we'll make sure to put that in the write-up for the chapter and also in our presentation, because we will come back in February and present the results of this analysis. So this is just sort of to tell you, this is what we're planning on doing, and then we'll tell you in February, this is what we did. These are the results.
Thank you.
So, Lauren, remind me, when you do the analysis of each water management strategy.
It's all water management strategies.
No, I'm saying
Oh,
back
the
when
evaluations?
you did the individual evaluation.
Mhm.
You did look at environmental impacts.
Yes, ma'am.
For each of those.
Yes, specifically, I mean, we provided the approximate map locations, sometimes specific map locations, provide that to SWCA. They did an environmental and cultural consideration evaluation for every water management strategy.
Okay, because I remembered, and Steve, maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I remember that there was some, since we have the recommendations in the environmental flows process, for the SB3 process, how does that factor into this analysis? Because we have those strategies approved.
Well, with the
Not
individual
strategies,
strategy analysis for surface water, because it's only really for the surface water ones, the firm yield has to be developed with the assumption that that strategy meets the environmental flow standards, the adopted standards for that diversion point. So in the individual analysis, that was done.
Okay.
Now in the cumulative effects, because the individual analysis was done with meeting that, those parameters will be incorporated in the cumulative effects. What the cumulative effects analysis does is if you have several surface water strategies on a stream where each one was evaluated individually as to effect, now you get the cumulative effect of that. And so we'll see if there's any particular issues. It's a little more difficult to say, well, did stream standards be met? And we're probably still talking about how we're going to actually pick that. But there will be that opportunity to see on a particular stream if there's multiple surface water strategies. What has been the effect with respect to meeting environmental flow standards?
Okay, so then on this.
Now, layered on in that analysis is full implementation of existing water rights. So there may already be issues on that stream because of the full use of existing water rights. So when you start glumming all this together, it may be a little difficult to parse all of that out.
Right. Well, so on this, then on your slide here on page 5 at the top, slide 9, is there a specific, that evaluation relative to the flow standards? I'm not seeing those words specifically here that would do exactly what, and maybe they're here, and he just used different words about that kind of cumulative effect of meeting those approved environmental flow standards, because you do have to kind of look in, if it's an existing water right, then that's grandfathered, that doesn't have to abide by those those standards. So I'm just, how do you do all of that and kind of do the SB3 effect?
So I think that this hydrologic assumption just has to do with the individual analysis of the project that includes surface water. That way it can then go into the model. So what the model in Chapter 6 is doing is just looking at if where it's 2070, everything went really great for everyone and all of the projects got implemented, what kind of effects it's going to have on the environment. The individual projects are all abiding, or the way that we haven't evaluated them, they're all abiding by the environmental flow standards when they're put into the WAM. I'm not sure if that helps.
But,
Yeah,
well,
but how to depict that
cumulative effect on the environmental flow standards.
Yeah, and there may be some ways with that flow duration curve that shows that. If you just go to that one as an example, you see the difference between the lighter line and the darker line.
Yes.
But when you get to 85% probability there, that's essentially the very low flows. And what happens is, because of the exercise of environmental flow standards, the new projects are not changing those low flows. Now, whether those low flows there met the existing standards or not, they may not because of existing water rights, but the addition of those new projects didn't exacerbate it, at least within that portion of the flow duration curve. So those are the ways that you can assess that cumulative effect. And when we get to that point here very shortly, we'll have to verbalize that in a way that is as understandable as possible.
Right.
We kind of need to see the effect.
Right. Because you have the low flow, which I understand, but then also the pulses and the other part on the other side.
Yeah, and those are the challenge. I think the
Yes.
subsistence is going to be fairly easy to describe, because that's kind of what I've described there.
Right.
Maybe even base flow.
Yes.
But the flow pulses, I don't think we're going to be able to get there with that. And there's kind of an equal challenge with the bay and estuary inflow, because there's certain probabilities of meeting it at different seasons, and how do you do that over this kind of analysis. So, I mean, we've had this struggle in the last plan.
Well, it would you may want to, in just thinking about as you do your cumulative effects analysis, how can we describe that in this chapter about how we factored in the SB3 process, how is all that working? If you can't actually do the calculation, is there some sort of narrative that maybe SWA could help us with to explain that? Because really this is, the first sort of plan, well, I get, this is the first plan, right? that
Well, the
we've done.
2016 plan
Had a little bit of it, yeah,
well,
that's right, that's right.
The standards were adopted
Yes,
in
that's
time
right.
to do the 2016 plan.
Did we address it in the cumulative effects at all?
I think that we use a model called the FRAT.
Flow regime application tool.
Yes, so, and the FRAT helps us output those figures that we saw on slide 8. So that takes into account pulse flow, subsistence, heat flow, everything regarding that aspect of it goes into the FRAT, which is done during the individual analysis, and it'll also be done again for this cumulative effects analysis.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And that's all I had for agenda item 13.
Any other comments relative to the cumulative effects analysis? It's kind of where the rubber hits the road.
I guess the only thing I'd ask, to be considered, is there any value in having some comparison of that to the 2016 plan to see specifically what changes? I think that the strategies, are very similar, so I don't think that we'll see any significant departures there. But, given that this is an iterative process, I think it'd be interesting at least to compare the two cycles and see if there is a difference.
Yeah.
So this wasn't in the presentation, but it's something that I think at this point it's worth bringing up. So there's a guiding principle. I can't remember which number it is off the top of my head, but the guiding principle was looking at all of the different ways that the approach would be modified slightly, and one of them was to eliminate the environmental assessments comparisons of the current year plan to the previous ones. And I think there was another comparison that is also being eliminated to previous plans to sort of streamline this effort, because it wasn't comparing apples to apples.
That was the problem.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
Well,
I think that's a lot of.
I think that answers my question.
But there are some parameters where you can still have a qualitative comparison. It was really mostly talking about eliminating that big table that was going all the way back to earlier plans that were very different, with a lot of surface water projects compared to what we're doing now. That, like Dan was saying, weren't really comparing apples to apples anymore.
That makes sense. Okay. Any other comments? All right, thank you very much. Next item. I think you're done, Lauren, huh? You made it through. A lot of good work. Thank you very much. Next is a discussion and appropriate action regarding setting the schedule for calendar year 2020 meetings. Hillary?
Yes, so you should have in your packet the suggested meeting dates for your regular planning group meetings, and then also at the bottom the proposed public meetings. But we can start with the regular planning group meetings if you guys feel comfortable with these dates. Our next meeting will be next month on the 20th, and the idea behind that was to make sure we had these two meetings back to back to prepare for the approval of the plan. And then you would meet again on September 3rd, and then again on November 5th. So, looking for some consensus on that item.
Well, and just a little more explanation. When we brought this to the planning group in November for approval, we had anticipated having that third meeting in August, and we ran into some scheduling conflicts. So working with the consultant team to make sure we would still be able to have a meeting in time to get the plan delivered to the Water Development Board. The September 3rd date was arrived at. So that is a change from what y'all had previously approved in November.
The date that it's due again?
March.
Yeah.
The final plan, I believe, is October 15th.
October 14th.
Yeah.
October 14th. We had the 16th. Okay.
So that September 3rd meeting date would be when the planning group would consider an action approving or adopting the regional plan.
That would incorporate any changes from the public process, et cetera. Okay.
I'd like to point out that on September 3rd, that will be the final day of the Texas Association of Groundwater Districts annual summit, and so probably a big chunk of this group will be across town at that meeting.
Is that your intention?
Yes.
Not since that's adoption day.
I mean, who, in this group, who all goes to that? I mean, I do. I bet, okay.
Can I ask some questions that might throw a wrench in all of these discussions? Okay, so we would have a meeting on February 20th to adopt the IPP, and then we would receive public comments and comments from the Texas Water Development Board, and then we would not meet again as a group until September, at which point we would be approving the final plan. Is that my understanding? Is correct?
That's what's laid out here.
So, given that, just throwing this out there, total wrench in your plans. Given that we sort of have this process of going through the comments that we've received, and we are requesting direction on substantial comments from you all, and getting that direction and then moving forward with actually making those revisions, with that proposed schedule, we wouldn't have an opportunity to get your direction as a group before approving the final plan. So would it be possible to have a meeting during the summer, sometime after the public comment period, after Texas Water Development Board, another agency review, to provide direction on any comments that are substantial?
Because we were looking for, so this would be, when is the water development, if we have our public meetings ending in May, when are comments?
So the TWPG review is 120 days, so that would be around July for our comments. And then I have to look at your meeting dates. Meeting public comment period ends 60 days after your hearing date, so that would, I think, be around July.
And that's 60 days from the first public hearing, not the last one. So we'd start the clock on the first public hearing.
Okay. So we could, is there, I think that the challenge was place to meet, right, Stephen? Was that the issue?
Correct. There was a conflict with this room, and we moved it to the...
Is there any earlier date in August?
I can certainly check into it with Sarah's staff and verify.
Well, what we can do is defer the decision on this, whether we have an earlier meeting or not until the February meeting.
Yeah.
That way we can check venues and schedules, and then y'all can decide you want an August and a September meeting. All of that can get decided.
Okay, so, all right, so let's see what, if there are some other days in August that we could at least propose and set at the next meeting in February, figure it out.
Okay.
And if those dates don't work, typically, I'm not as familiar with your previous cycle federal and state agency comments, but in the other regions that I've worked in, those have typically been pretty minimal, not too contentious. So if there were times after the July 6th date, you should be able to at least handle all of the responses to public comments, if not the federal and state agency on a consensus basis. So that would be, I think that would be a meaningful option if there isn't a good date after August 5th.
Okay. All right. We've got some guidance to look at there.
Okay, and then the second thing we need to talk about is the proposed public meetings. The last cycle, the group had 3 public meetings, so we provided a couple dates and locations. Is there interest in having 3 again? Do we want to have less or perhaps more? Just open it up to the group. Right, so we're required to have just 1, but last time we did 3. So just kind of opening it up to the idea, if you would like to have 3 again, or if you'd like to only have 1.
May I ask about attendance at the 3 last time? If anybody remembers?
Yes, there was quite a few. I attended San Marcos and Victoria, and San Marcos had quite a few. I did not attend the San Antonio's, but Victoria was maybe a little bit
It seems to
less.
me that there was a lot of attendance that it would behoove us to go ahead and have 3.
I think that helps deal with the geographic distribution of input, and frankly, it's always hard to go backwards on, public involvement. That's a hard thing to explain as to why you reduce that versus keep it the same or expand it. So I think 3 makes sense.
Any concerns about going forward with the 3 meetings?
And you guys are okay with the locations of these 3, San Antonio, San Marcos, and Victoria? Okay.
All right, we'll get those on the calendar.
Yeah.
And I guess there's a public notice requirement and such that we'll do at the next February meeting, correct? Okay.
Do I remember those being in the evening last time?
They were. Yeah, they were.
All right, so possible items, the agenda items then for the Region L meeting, the next February meeting?
And it's an impartial list, and one is the authorizing posting that notice. But there will be some other things that we'll work with Elizabeth on to make sure we got the proper wording, proper number of agenda items so that we meet all the administrative requirements of adopting that initially prepared plan. And of course, we'll get it flowing to make sure we get all the report outs, for the work that has been, that remains, done between now and the next meeting.
Also, the decision or possible decision to slot another meeting in there after.
Yes, and another meeting, we'll have the cumulative effects analysis. I think we're going to have the presentation you mentioned from socioeconomic presentation. And then I guess we would take some, do we actually take an action on the initially prepared plan, or we just, that's what I thought. So there'll be a big action on the initially prepared plan. Now, do we still have chapters out on the website for people to comment on?
And there will be more, yes.
So keep watching your emails for
We'll
that.
have an agenda item to go through comments on that, just like we did today. So it will be a full meeting.
So watch your emails to go out and do comments on other chapters. All right. Any other public comment at the end of the meeting? Haven't received any sign-in sheets. All right, we're adjourned. Thank you. See you on February the 20th.